I just produced my very first serious animation, and even though it's just a really short 1-minute animation, I'm kinda proud of it. There's so many wrong things about the animation, but I can't expect perfection from my very first project. I'll just learn as I move forward. But let's rewind the tape back and see how I came up with and produced this whole animation. Everything started 2 weeks ago when, as part of my weekly projects, I started working on this one concept. As mentioned in many previous videos, I always start all my projects from one reference image, after which my creative juices take over and transform that into something completely different. Recently I started thinking about how I need to come up with something different. It seems like simply making still renders and posting them doesn't get any kind of attention from anyone, and that is completely understandable. Since I can go on any decent 3D artist profile and just see the same shit I'm doing, which is some 3D cool renders. That means that if I want to stand out the way I know I want, I need to go one step above and produce something a little bit more than just a nice render. I need to produce something that will keep people engaged and make them pay attention to my work. All of that means that I had to start creating animations instead of simple common images. I set myself to create this environment I knew I wanted to create. I had absolutely no ideas about how I'll turn this into an animation, or even if I could technically achieve some of the ideas that were running through my head, but I just said I'll figure it out randomly once the environment is done. And that right there was my first mistake. Make sure you never do it the way I did it. You should always know from the get-go what you want to do, as it will dictate your whole workflow in that project. I ended up spending a bunch of time on random shit I thought I would need, so that in the end I found out I didn't need that exact shit. I started modeling the scene in Blender. The environment is pretty basic and I knew I could knock it off by simply making some modular pieces and reusing those to build the entire environment. So I did just that. I came up with some arbitrary dimensions and stick to those. I built the general modular pieces and took them all into ZBrush for sculpting all the nice details and damage. Eventually I had all the general pieces done and sculpted. It was time to UV unwrap them as dirty as possible and set them straight into Substance Painter. In Substance the work was pretty easy and straightforward. I only had to texture one of those pieces from scratch, as all the other pieces would conveniently share the exact same wood material. So I only had to create the main material once, and then I was able to apply that to the rest of the objects I've made, change a few parameters, and they were done. I now had a nice detail and texture hallway. It was time to fill it up with props. Luckily enough, I have my own library of assets I've built over the years, so I didn't have to spend the time to model and texture everything from scratch for this particular project, as I could simply reuse some of my old stuff. Thanks to the Blender Kit add-on, accessing my own 3D assets was even easier than the usual import FBX, apply the textures, and so on. I just opened up the Blender Kit window, set the filter to only show my own assets, and I could just click on one and it popped into my scene and it was ready to be used. I recommend Blender Kit both as an artist and creator. I'm using it as both and it has always been a huge help in my own productions. Alright, so now I have a full environment. It's done, but it lacks something in the end of the hallway. I mean, I built this really cool corridor that leads to what exactly? I feel like there should be something important waiting at the end of this hallway, but I have no fucking clue what could be an interesting choice for that. I go to my friend for some help. Maybe he can bounce some ideas and give me an idea about what kind of room could be there at the end of the hallway. He replies with something I wasn't expecting, saying that a spider crawling from there would be cool. I say, oh yeah, great, I wanted to hear what kind of room I could make in there, and he comes in saying a fucking spider. The fuck do I do with that answer? Anyway, I leave him be, as I wasn't really interested in his feedback that much. It just didn't seem to be on the same wavelength to what I had in my mind. I mean, a spider would have been cool and all, but I don't have the time to make a spider, texture it, animate it, and so on. And yeah, I could go on Marketplace and buy a spider, but still animating that shit in a cool way would have taken too much time. Time I didn't have if I wanted to meet my deadlines. His feedback was great in the end though. It gave me the idea of thinking a little bit different. I was so focused on building some kind of room in there, but his answer made me think a little bit different. And I started thinking about adding some supernatural element in there to spice it up. My incredibly complex and amazing answer to what that could be? An eye! A giant fucking eye. Yep, that's all I could come up with. I mean, I could come up with a bunch of other cool stuff, but nothing as easy to animate as a fucking giant sphere, right? Now, it was time to create the most complex scene of them all, at least technically speaking. Is the hand ripping the painting coming through the wall? Well, this idea went through a bunch of iterations before it found its final form. In the beginning I wanted to stay true to the reference image and make a bunch of hands coming out from the walls. I tested that idea and I knew that if I wanted to make this look great, I'd have to animate all those hands individually so they don't look like a repetitive piece of shit. But of course I knew I was too lazy to do all of that. I mean, I'm not great at animating, nor do I enjoy it so much that I wanted to take on like 10 or 15 different hands to animate them individually. So, I did what any other smart man would do, and I changed the idea of a hallway full of hands to a hallway full of just one single hand. And now we are talking. Now that's the kind of workload I'm okay with on my behalf. As I said, initially the idea was for the hand to come out of the wall. I did some testing and I realized that the way I would be doing this shot would make it difficult for me to blend the simulated wall to the rest of the walls. So I knew I had to modify the idea a little bit. The next idea that came to my mind was this thing I stick with, which is to make the hand come out of one of the paintings. It seemed cool and it would help me out greatly because I don't have to blend anything to nothing since it is its own individual element. For this shot I let Houdini do the hard work. If you don't already know it, Houdini is exceptional when it comes to simulations. I mean, Houdini is exceptional when it comes to almost anything you'd want, but especially simulations. I went in, brought my animated hand as an alembic file, created a plane that would serve as the painting's fabric, used an edge fractor node to create the ripped pieces, and then I just ran a vellum cloth simulation on it, using the animated hand as a collider mesh. It took me a few tries to get it look fine, but once I had it, I could simply export the hand and the cloth as an alembic file together. I brought that back into Blender, positioned everything into the painting frame, and that was it basically. Now I only had to place the textures on those alembic files and everything was set and ready to be used. I was now getting to the final stages of this project, and I was getting closer and closer to what I knew was the most annoying thing of any 3D work, and that is rendering. One main reason as to why I don't enjoy making animations that much is because I need to render a bunch of shit, and that shit takes so much fucking time. I'm running an excellent computer and I have one of the best GPUs you can get your hands on, but that's still not enough. If I were to render this the way I'd want it, it would still take a few days for Blender to render everything. And those days I couldn't do any other work because I would be, rendering all of this. I do, however, have a render farm I'm using from time to time for exactly this kind of stuff. The great thing about the render farms, you put your Blender file in there and they use like 5 GPUs at once to render your animation and it comes back to you exceptionally fast. The best thing about the render farms, well, I mean they cost money. And yes, even though it's not exceptionally expensive, I'm still paying money to render something that will make me exactly $0 back. Most it will make me is like 30 likes on Instagram or some shit like that. I had to render everything at a low 1080p resolution and use like 35 samples to drive the cost of rendering down. I spent a total of about $70 to render all the shots you've seen in the animation, which is decent. I mean, $70 is low, but it came with another price, which is bad rendering quality due to the low samples, and you can see that obviously in most of the shots, especially right here where the lamp is. So now I had all my shots rendered. I went into After Effects to turn all those PNGs into actual videos and also compose the different elements in there such as smoke, dirt and other kind of debris. I then moved into Premiere Pro where I took all my shots and I did all the video editing and sound design. Earlier this month I bought an unlimited subscription for Storyblocks and that's what I used for the music and sound effects. I spent about half a day putting everything in place into Premiere and it was done. My first Blender animation was ready to see the light. All in all, I loved working on this project. It taught me a lot. It forced me to make last-second decisions and come up with creative ways to fix all the blockages I ran into. It forced me to come up with a whole story given just a random environment I've built, and it forced me to somehow tell that story in an interesting and captivating way. So I guess from now on, my weekly projects will turn into bi-weekly projects, and they will all be some kind of animation. So this is me stepping up my game. Let's see where it gets me.